Today we live in the shadow of a monstrous writhing cloud of mushroom-like shape. Some days the shadow seems to be less opaque and the sunlight filters through. On other days it becomes heavy with apprehension and the threat of total annihilation becomes real. That threat is always with us. We shall be both older and wiser people when the day comes for the shadow to retreat out of our imagination. Until that day comes, we must prepare ourselves, each one of us, to face the appalling catastrophe that may be our supreme testing time in the history of civilization. It is human nature to wish to save life, no matter how great the danger involved or how impersonal the life that is at stake. In peacetime, we look to the trained professional to save our lives. In wartime, those of us who are needed on the home front must all become professional lifesavers. The days have gone when we could sit back and say, "This has nothing to do with me." A nuclear war will have something to do with every single person who is able to stand up and walk. Everyone must have some idea of what to do. An untrained helper, however courageous or willing, will be a nuisance to his fellow workers and might well prove to be a source of danger. First, we must accept the fact that we shall all be in it. And secondly, we must ask ourselves what we individually can do to help. In this respect, we must find out the nature of the beast, learn a little of its effects, and how best to combat them. No matter how large be the area of destruction, there will always be much which can be done. In fact, the greater the destruction, the more outside aid will be necessary. In a simple, isolated incident, as was experienced in the last war, when an HE or incendiary bomb destroyed a building, the rescue work and firefighting were dealt with by local resources. As the missiles became more powerful and the area of destruction increased, so the civil defense organization became more complex. No longer could local resources deal effectively with the situation. Outside aid was directed by the controller to the damaged areas, and many lives were saved, as well as homeless people catered for by highly trained specialists in the art of rescue and welfare. At the height of the enemy's bombardment on our cities, firefighting appliances were being called from Southampton to help London, and later from London to help Portsmouth. Mobile civil defense columns were constantly being directed to new areas of devastation. The call went out for help, and it was never once left unanswered. When peace returned to our islands, we had hardly taken stock of our resources when we were confronted with a new danger more frightful than ever before. Our vocabulary became charged with terms of this atomic age. We learned to speak of ground zero, of heat flash, of gamma radiation, and mass destruction by blast. We learned to think in terms of miles instead of streets and buildings, of many thousands rendered homeless instead of hundreds. Gradually, our minds began to accept the problems created by this new horror. We learned to plan our campaign by working on a set and known pattern of destruction. The experts chose one particular size of bomb and called it, with all the impersonality that only scientists could muster, the nominal bomb. This nominal bomb was the one used at Nagasaki. It represents the power of 20,000 tons of TNT. It became a suitable yardstick to which one could add or subtract noughts to describe the size of the missile. No matter whether the bomb turned out to be half the power of the nominal or twice the power of the nominal, the type of destruction remained the same. Only the scale of destruction was altered. To the great majority of civil defense workers, the size of the bomb is only of academic interest. whether a person being rescued from fallen debris has been trapped as a result of a larger or smaller than nominal bomb is of little consequence. What matters is that the person be rescued quickly and be cared for, while the rescuers turn their attention to other pressing needs. Today, with the shadow of a hydrogen bomb hanging over us, the problem remains the same. But civil defense will have to rely on outside aid to a very much larger degree than before. The hydrogen bomb, as it is commonly called, since the fusion of hydrogen isotopes is part of the explosive process, has no mysterious characteristics of its own. Its effects are, in the main, similar to those of an atom bomb, but on a very much larger scale. It is therefore better to refer to it as a so many times nominal bomb. A nominal bomb, you will remember, is equal to 20,000 tons of TNT. We are told that a 500 times nominal power would be a realistic figure to work on, giving a power equal to 10 million tons of TNT, or 10 megatons. So let us apply the appropriate scales and see what sort of a problem we might have to tackle. You may remember that in the film The Atomic Bomb, the three effects of the explosion were taken separately. We were told that the first of these effects, that of heat, came from the searing flash at the moment of the explosion. With a nominal bomb detonated at a height of 1,000 feet, we learnt that only those people exposed to the flash within a distance of 2.5 miles from ground zero would suffer skin burns. Those taking cover would be unharmed, though at ranges up to 1.25 miles, the buildings they were in might have caught fire. You may also remember that this tremendous burst of heat lasted for only a second or so. With a 500 times nominal bomb, this effect lasts for something like 20 seconds and can therefore hardly be called a flash. As one might expect with a more powerful bomb, the range of the effects increases, and with an airburst at the appropriate height, fires may be started out to a radius of about 15 miles. On the other hand, with a ground burst, the main fire zone may only extend to about 10 miles, because a lot of heat would be absorbed in the crater. As we shall see later, it is much more likely that bombs of such power will be burst on or near the ground than in the air. The precautions that may be taken to minimize the effects of heat are exactly the same as given for the nominal bomb. Do you remember them? The whitewashing of window glass, the fitting of shutters, and dipping curtains in fire-resistant solutions. The considerable increase in range brought about by a larger bomb need not necessarily result in a proportionately greater number of casualties from the effect of heat. With adequate warning, everybody should be under cover. But even those people who are caught out in the open at the moment of the explosion could, if they took cover immediately, avoid part of the full effect, providing they were some distance from ground zero. Next, in the atomic bomb film, we learnt about radioactivity, immediate radiation, and residual radiation. For immediate radiation, we were told that gamma rays were the chief source of danger. Neutrons could, for practical purposes, be disregarded. With a 500 times nominal bomb, the same lesson holds good. But to those in the open, the range of a 50% lethal dose is increased from 3/4 mile up to 2.5 miles. Some damage can, of course, be caused to people in the open from immediate gamma radiation at distances further than 2.5 miles, but there will be no significant effect beyond about 4 miles from ground zero. This increase in range is perhaps not as great as one might have supposed. The reason for this is that the gamma rays are scattered or dissipated in the atmosphere and become less concentrated with distance. It should be appreciated that with a 500 times nominal bomb, the 2.5 mile radius is in any case inside the limit of total destruction of houses. With a ground burst, however, the second form of radiation, residual radiation, becomes a much more serious hazard. You may remember that we were warned that should a nominal bomb be exploded at ground level, then dust and atomized rubble would be made radioactive and be scattered over a wide area, notably downwind of the explosion. This was termed the fallout. To do the maximum damage by blast, an atomic bomb should be airburst. But with the much more powerful hydrogen bomb, the range of the blast damage is so great by comparison with any likely built-up target area that a ground burst can do all the destruction required and at the same time produce a tremendous fallout problem as a bonus. Therefore, this more powerful type of bomb is more likely to be burst on or near the ground than in the air. When this takes place, thousands of tons of atomized earth, stone, brick and steel are sucked up into the mushroom cloud and become highly radioactive. Much of this material falls back into the area from which it came. But the lighter particles are carried with the wind and may not fall to Earth until many hours later, and possibly many miles away downwind. This fallout is thus a danger not only to the area surrounding Ground Zero, but to other communities at considerable distances away. We know, for example, that Japanese fishermen received serious doses of gamma radiation from fallout after an American test when they were about 70 miles downwind from the explosion. Fortunately, even the average small house in this country gives a good measure of protection from fallout, and this could be improved by quite simple measures. Refuge rooms can be made in buildings, and slit trenches with overhead cover provide a substantial means of protection. Much thought is being devoted to working out all these details, which will in due course be made public. The public must be prepared to have to stay indoors for at least 2 days, and possibly longer in some areas, until the radioactivity has decayed sufficiently for them to come out for short periods. This means that houses would have to be stocked with food and water, and preferably a battery-operated radio, so that contact with the outer world can be maintained. Dairy cattle should be kept under cover, and, if possible, other livestock as well. Cooperation between civil defense and the meteorological services should make it possible to give sufficient warning to those people living downwind of an explosion to enable them to take proper precautions. Next we come to the effect of blast. The categories of damage used in the original atom bomb film have been slightly changed. With a nominal bomb burst over a British city, there would be total destruction of houses out to a radius of half a mile from Ground Zero. Beyond this, irreparable damage out to 3/4 of a mile, severe to moderate damage out to 2 miles, and light damage out to a radius of 3 miles. So, with a 500 times nominal bomb detonated at ground level, these distances are some 3.5 miles for total destruction of houses, some 5 miles for irreparable damage, some 13 miles for severe to moderate house damage, and 20 miles for light damage. This distance will bring the limit of blast effects out into the open country for nearly all British cities. It is because the whole of an attacked city will be damaged to some degree that we must think in terms of help from outside. Taking all 3 effects of a 500 times nominal bomb detonated at ground level, let us try and see the problems that would confront us as we neared the area of damage. The first and most serious consideration is residual radiation from fallout, which will impose delays on progress. Since the area of heaviest contamination will be spread downwind, and fallout will occur far beyond the area of blast damage, approach will probably have to be restricted to the upwind and crosswind sides of the city for the first few hours. Once the Radiological Safety Organization allow controlled entry into the area, we should find something like this. As we approach within about 20 miles of ground zero, we should encounter some damage to roof tiles and slates and to light structures such as garden sheds and garages. Broken windows would have been evident long before we reached this 20-mile radius. For the next 7 miles, damage would be increasing so that at about 13 miles from ground zero, we should find widespread damage to houses like this. Assuming that residual radioactivity permits us to continue, we should, over the next 8 miles, traverse an area of moderate to severe damage until we reach the houses suffering irreparable damage some 5 miles from ground zero. In the course of this last 8 miles, from 13 to 5 miles from ground zero, we should encounter 2 further obstacles, in addition to the invisible barrier imposed by residual radioactivity. First, the debris in the streets would steadily increase from slates and tiles and glass at the beginning to heavy debris from demolished buildings nearer the 5-mile radius. Secondly, we should have to traverse the main zone of fires, which would be between 3.5 and 10 miles from ground zero. The mass of debris in the streets at 5-mile radius would be so deep that little further progress would be possible unless large open spaces, wide roads or railway tracks, or broad waterways were usable. Even with such means of access, residual radioactivity in this area would be so intense that reconnaissance teams would be unable to penetrate much further for many hours. It must be accepted that little or no rescue work would be possible within 3 or 4 miles of ground zero, where houses would be completely demolished and even the strongest buildings severely damaged. To recap the 3 effects of a 500 times nominal bomb detonated at ground level on a British city. First, there is heat, with a fire zone from 3.5 to 10 miles. Second, there is radiation. Immediate radiation out to 4 miles, and residual radiation out to 11 miles or more in the target area, and the grave fallout menace downwind. Third, there is the damage caused by blast, giving total destruction out to 3.5 miles, irreparable damage out to 5 miles, severe damage out to 13 miles, and light damage out to 20 miles. The picture may well be considered alarming, but remember, it is based on the latest scientific data. It is as well to face up to it and plan our action accordingly. The large increase in the scale of damage produced by a more powerful bomb presents a host of new and complex problems to those responsible for civil defense administration. They have to consider mobile control centers and mobile columns of rescue and welfare teams. They have to consider the quickest and most efficient means of bringing succor to a stricken city, faced with the inevitable delay brought about by residual radiation. But to the likes of us, you and me and every willing helper who has been trained, the individual problem is no different. There would be many hundreds of thousands of trapped and injured waiting for us to rescue them. There would be an even greater number of homeless, each one requiring advice and guidance as to where to go, so that they may be cared for and fed in an area free from the hazard of radioactivity. If nuclear war should come to our islands, and some of our cities be subjected to this most terrible of man-made catastrophes, are we, in other more fortunate cities, or those of us who live in the heart of our countryside, are we to sit back complacently and say, "Bad luck, Jack. I'm all right"?